感性的事要讲，就几件事情报告。第一个就是大家手上都有拿到议程表嘛，然后每年都不想印议程表，但因为怕那个大家交了钱，然后什么东西都没拿到，所以只好印一下议程表。但议程表又换了，所以对我昨天半夜大概1点多还在那个调议程表，所以大家几乎都有带电脑，所以你可以上电脑看最新的议程表。其实那个议程表没印好啦，就是理论上它到今天的时候，上面浮现那个浮水印，红色的浮水印就是 out of date， 对，但今年那个有瑕疵，所以没有浮出来。好，然后另外一个就是我们昨天晚上发生很多事，昨天晚上得到一个赞助，就是 CLBC， 如果大家在那个报道处有拿到这个卡片的话，那我们礼拜天会在那边办一个 hackathon， 所以有兴趣的大概10点半会开始，有兴趣的就可以自由参加这样子，那还蛮高级的，对，所以大家可以去看一下。那接下来就是非常准时的10点开始，所以我们要欢迎今天的 keynote speaker Selena。
I think these are on. Yes. Hello. Thank you very much for having me. I wanted to, first of all, thank the organizers, all of the organizers and volunteers for OSDC Taiwan for inviting me, and especially HC, who I got the first email from and who has helped me so much to get here today. So, for the past, you know what? This is the wrong presentation. Hold on. Okay. That's better. Thank you very much to Audrey Tang for translating my slides. The volunteer work that I have focused on for the past couple of years has focused on bringing in people who are not currently part of open source into our open source communities. And I think that the most important thing that I've learned in doing that work is captured in this quotation. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and in the expert's mind, there are few. I love all of the meanings that are captured in this quote, and most of my talk today is just exploring all of those meanings that I've encountered as I've been teaching beginners. So I myself am a beginner teacher. I've only just started writing lessons and teaching classes to adult women who are learning to program, some of them for the very first time. And all of what I'm going to share today is based on those personal experiences working with these first-time adult programmers. And I'm very excited about working with these beginners because it's what I think I can do to help bring new people into open source, to get us more contributors than we currently have, and especially to bring more women and underrepresented groups of people into our communities. These are the kinds of people who have believed for far too long that they have nothing to contribute to open source. And if there's a single thing that you take away from this talk that I'm giving today, it's this. The next time that you answer a beginner's question, pause and take a moment to consider how a beginner will feel when you answer their question. I believe that all of you already know enough and are kind enough to help any beginner succeed in programming. And what I hope today is that I give you some extra tools to help these beginners feel successful and excited about learning and joining our open source communities. So I started out in open source in 1995. I installed Linux on a computer, and my friends helped me build my very first computer from a motherboard and CPU and putting everything together. And then years later, in 1999, I joined my first Perl Mongers group in Portland, Oregon, where I now also live. And then after that, I discovered PostgreSQL. And PostgreSQL is the community that I probably spend the most time with now. And then this past September, I met a ton of women who are involved in PyLadies. This is a picture from a PyLadies gathering that we had at PyCon just last month. And I was so excited about their mission when I met the PyLadies, and their mission is to just get women who code together. It's very simple. I was so excited about that I founded my own chapter in Portland, Oregon. And many of these chapters, in addition to trying to just get women who already code together, they offer free programming classes, and they publish their curriculum for these classes online. The first project that the Portland PyLadies took on was to take a Coursera class together. And before we knew it, we had 60 women that I had never met before signed up to come and take these classes together. About 20 of them would show up at a time, and we'd go over the homework, talk about Python, and meet other programmers. But many of the women who came to these groups had never programmed before, and a lot of them struggled with math and fancy syntax like list comprehensions. They needed a lot more help than they were getting in the Coursera class itself. So a couple weeks in, it became very clear to me that these women needed more help and that someone was going to need to provide it. And I had to decide, was I going to just let this Coursera class end and turn this meetup into the normal type of user group that every other user group is like? Or was I going to try to teach these women who had never programmed before really how to program? And clearly, since I'm here today, I decided the latter. I decided to try to learn how to teach. And one of the first lessons that I learned was about choice. That the beginner programmers are often so open to possibility, and they're given 1,000 different choices of what to do, and they become overwhelmed by it. They have trouble deciding what the reasonable next step is going to be in the face of all of the different possibilities that are in front of them. You can also think about this problem in terms of the culture of open source software. Perl is famous for this phrase. There's more than one way to do it. And it symbolizes the best part of the beginner's mind, the place where we're full of adventure, we're full of possibility, and we're very inclusive of the differences that we all have as people and as programmers. But when instead of being open to possibility, the beginners are overwhelmed, there's no adventure. There's just confusion. And here's an example of a type of confusion that I didn't really understand before I started teaching beginner programmers. If you look at this download page, there are so many choices for a beginner. And this page has actually improved since last September when I was first dealing with it. Down way at the bottom, you can see alternative implementations. That used to be at the top. So the first thing that a beginner saw on this page was they had to choose between C Python and regular Python, and they tried to figure out what all that meant, and they were very, very confused. But there is definitely a better way to make these types of pages. And fortunately, python.org is getting an overhaul. This is live right now. It's preview.python.org. And you can see here that the page detected that I was running Mac OS X, and it suggested a couple downloads. And then right below that, it says, wondering which version to use, and it directs me to a link to tell me more. And finally, there's a group of links down at the bottom that direct me to other things that I might download, other operating systems that I might get Python for. And then there's some lovely parachutes that are helping me have a soft landing on my first experience trying to download Python. And I love this page so much because it solved every question. It answered every question that the PyLadies who are learning from me had when they first encountered this page. And that brings me to another important insight, that our job as teachers is to help answer the question, what do I do next for these beginners, for every student? And not every student needs that much help, right? Not every moment when you're teaching do they need to answer this question exactly. But at some point, nearly every student will need this kind of help to help discern between all the different choices, all the different possibilities that we put in front of them. And when we help students decide which step to take next, we need to take into consideration how that experience makes them feel. If we're helping them, but they don't feel confident in their actions, then they haven't truly learned what it is that we're trying to teach them, how to be independent programmers. And it's our responsibility not just to give correct answers, but to also enable people to confidently solve their own problems the next time they need to do it on their own. So to try to figure out how I can help students feel more confident, I decided to look at what my own emotions are like when I'm learning a new programming skill. And so I drew this picture. And this is what it was like for me to learn a new database migration system. I was trying to figure out the system. It's called Alembic. And the peaks there are the euphoria, the valleys there are the despair. And the points where I was happiest, like the very first initial happiness point was I was reading the documentation and I really thought that this tool was going to solve all of my problems. And I felt so great. The other ups in there were when I succeeded with experiments in code and when I was actually implementing the thing that I really needed to finish. And the valleys down at the bottom were when I tried the tutorials and they didn't actually work. When I wrote some code and that code totally failed. And then finally, when I was trying to refactor all of the tests to work with my new migration system. But then you can see at the end, my emotions leveled out and I was happy and I was satisfied, generally satisfied with the tool that I chose. So this is an example of success. So what does it look like when someone tries to learn how to program and they don't succeed? So here's my scale again with euphoria at the top and despair at the bottom. And I think it looks something like this. This is what I observed when a woman would come to PyLadies and then just never come back. I think initially they're very happy, but then something happens that causes them to just give up. And in one particular case, I know exactly what happened. A woman attended the workshops, and then they tried things on their own, and then they came back to a workshop, and then actually in this case they were using Windows, and they made a little change that just broke their entire developer environment, and they just never came back. So that's sad. I hate it when that happens. So, like I said, we've got 100 women now involved, so I also have a sense of what happens when the PyLadies who come in, how that succeeds and what that emotional graph looks like. And I think it's something a little more like this. You still have all those peaks and valleys. You have a lot of peaks and valleys, in fact. But in the end, we have excitement for programming. And with the 60+ women who were involved in Coursera, the thing that kept them coming back, even though they were having all these difficult experiences, was they kept coming to these hackathons and meetups where they could talk with other people, they could commiserate over the things that went wrong, they could get things to work again, and they could, because they kept coming back and meeting people over and over, they could see objectively that they were improving, and at the same time, they could feel like they were getting better, they were making friends, and being supported by the people who are also struggling the same way that they were. So, what are we doing in these hackathons and meetups that help people get through these pits of despair in programming? Well, from a teaching standpoint, here's what we try to do. we try to help with the unwritten first chapter in open source development. There's so many details that we all take for granted that the first-time programmers really struggle with, like that Python download page. You know, I showed that to some friends of mine, and they just didn't see at all what the problem was until I stepped them through very carefully and showed them what it was like for someone who didn't know what CPython was, who didn't know what 64-bit meant, how hard it was for them to just download Python. In our classes, we really pay a lot of attention to this to try to help those beginners get through it. We also try to set really big goals for people. Actually, the people come with their own really big goals. Like, they want to get a job. They want to give presentations at conferences. They want to write their first open source application. And we talk to them about that, and we try to figure out a path for them to make those things happen. We also try to provide really early wins, like collaborating on established projects and getting through tutorials successfully together and demonstrating the new skills that they learn as fast as we can and as many times as we can as they're part of the group. And we also try to establish a learning environment to make sure that everything that's going on when we're in person together contributes to learning. So to make all of that happen, there are quite a few useful tools that I'm going to describe, and a few that you might be able to use right away in your open source groups, at work, and also I think with your families. Because I think that everyone should learn how to program, even if it's just a little bit. A couple of my favorite tools are two ideas that Hacker School wrote about. It's a programming school, a free programming school in New York City. And they've established two main roles for everyone that mentors, for everyone that teaches, and for the students who participate. And the first thing they do is they ban the phrase, "well, actually." When someone starts, and I'm not sure actually if this, if this translates fully, but when someone starts a sentence this way in English, they're correcting someone. And the truth is, teachers rarely need to correct in order to be good teachers. Mostly what they can do is they can ask questions and help the student come to a good solution from their own ideas without any of that correction. And banning that phrase is just a reminder that we don't need to correct students in order to be great teachers. The other phrase that they've banned, or the other thing that they've banned, is feigning surprise. Because when you act surprised that someone doesn't know something, that's actually for the student that inspires a feeling of shame, that they should have known something when they came to you. And really, when you admit that you don't know something, that's an act of courage and something that teachers should always encourage in their students. Another great tool is pairing. And I think a lot of us here already know this, that pair programming is a wonderful activity that helps everyone learn. And in a teaching environment, students who have just learned a new skill are often the best teachers of that new school to their peers, or skill to their peers. And if a student's struggling, they may find it easier actually to talk to their peer and ask questions than like raising their hand in a class or potentially embarrassing themselves in front of a large group of people or their teacher. And if both of the students are struggling with a concept, they can face that together rather than feeling embarrassed or alone as they're struggling. Another practice for the teacher that I have tried to implement is to spend a lot less time lecturing in front of the class. I'm sort of breaking that rule this morning, but my rule of thumb is 1 minute of instruction to 3 or 4 minutes of practice for the class. And I try to only prepare about 15 minutes of instruction time and chunk it up into 5-minute parts. This keeps the classes interesting and the students very engaged in what they're trying to learn. And finally, teachers should listen carefully to how the students respond to their lessons. Students will often rephrase or ask very important questions when lessons aren't clear. And recording those questions that they ask, like writing them down right when it happens, and then thinking about very carefully about how the student rephrased a lesson might provide clues about how to make those lessons better for the next student. One student compared get rebase, because we do a lot of get training, because get is very difficult. She compared get rebase to seam ripping, which in sewing, it's like when you make a mistake, when you're sewing two pieces of fabric together, you rip out the thread and then re-sew it. And it's a really great way to visualize in your head what's happening when you rebase. And I've used that metaphor ever since then. So all those tools that I described, I've been using these with the Pi Ladies since last September. We now have 111 women involved in these user groups. They attend other user groups in Portland and are contributing to open source already. And we continue to add more women every week. And one of the ways that we've kept this group of women so connected to one another is that we have an amazing number of meetings, 1 or 2 meetings a week. And I don't go to every single one of them because it's a lot of time. But they have their own hackathons on the weekend, and then midweek we teach lessons. And it has been working very, very well. So those are some tools you can use to help students learn. But teaching itself benefits the teacher. And I think that there's lots of these benefits that I personally have received that I want to share with you. So I made a list. I made a list of all the things I personally have gotten out of teaching. And the first thing is that I write much better code now. I've gotten way more concise. I've gotten really, really good at Git, because I have to explain over and over what it is that you have to do in order to push changes and send pull requests. I really had to learn it in order to be able to teach it, and I think that that definitely makes us all better programmers. I write way better documentation now, because I've seen firsthand what happens when I'm not clear and a beginner tries to use my documentation that's not clear. I've also gained a lot of perspective about how people who are friendly and interested in open source experience our communities for the very first time. That experience can be really a struggle initially. And so I try to work very hard with Pi Ladies to make this easier for every new person that gets involved. So, more than just myself, I think open source communities benefit quite a bit from teaching beginners. And I think one of the most important ways right now that those open source communities benefit is you recruit diverse members into your communities. I've regularly attended user groups and conferences and meetings at my company where I am the only woman. And it makes me so happy now to meet so many other women and to bring them into these other user groups and meetings so that they don't feel alone, that they feel like other people like them are contributing to open source. And these are 3 organizations that I support who work on increasing the number of women and underrepresented groups in open source. And if you have any questions about any of these, please come and find me during this conference. I'm going to be here today and tomorrow, the whole time. These groups are incredibly important, and they're making measurable progress and change in our open source communities, and they're worthy of your time and support to check them out. And just for some additional information, the ADA initiative is focused on advocacy for women in open source and increasing the participation of women specifically in open source and in leadership. OpenHatch.org is an organization that helps beginners commit their first patches, contribute patches, or commit really, contribute their first patches to any open source project. And the way that it works is you take your bug list or your issue tracker and you contribute it, you let OpenHatch look at all of those issues, and then it creates this portal for beginners, and it helps you walk through the documentation that beginners need to know, document all the things that beginners need to know before they contribute to your open source project. And finally, PyLadies, which I've been the most involved with in the last 6 months, they're just about getting women who code, and specifically who code in Python, together. And we have chapters all across the United States and some in Europe. I don't think that we have any in Asia yet, but I wish that we did. And we have mailing lists and websites, and we just try to get more women together. And finally, I wanted to close with what I think are the most important reasons why teaching and learning how to teach are totally worth your time. This is why I'm giving this talk today, and why I've spent so much time trying to figure out how to become a better teacher. The first reason is that I like to go to parties, and I want those parties to be more fun. And my idea of fun is talking about open source. And I want more people to understand what I mean when I say open source. I want more people to understand what I mean when I talk about contributing patches and the frustrations that I have with software, and how wonderful it is to know how to program. And I also want to talk about all the more normal things that people talk about at parties, but I want my social group to be full of women who understand code and who want to talk with me about it. These concepts really aren't that hard, and we really should be teaching our friends and family more about it. Oops, I think it skipped ahead. The next thing that teaching beginners helps is it helps everyone become more knowledgeable about programming and what it really is. There's still so many people that don't understand what code is. They don't know anything about it. My husband just learned some basic programming last year. And upon learning what variables and loops actually were, he said to me, "I can't believe that I allowed myself to be so ignorant of this for so long." I really believe, and that's part of what makes me really believe that we should be teaching our friends and family. And my hope is that by starting on this now, by teaching our friends and family what it is that we do, and by spending time with these absolute beginners, even if it's just to show them those variables and loops, or maybe to help them write an Excel macro for the first time, we're going to create more informed leaders. We need more leaders in government, in journalism, at universities, and in our schools who understand programming and also how to teach it. And we need more of them so that we make better use of our resources, we make better choices when we vote, and that we don't just accept proprietary software, and that we demand transparency, and that we all work together to make the best software that we can and to use as much open source software as we can. And if we do this, I think we will definitely create a better world. A world where our friends and our family know and appreciate our work, and there will be even more open source contributors than we have today. So please, go out and teach. And thank you. That's all I have. I don't know if there's, I know I was supposed to take quite a bit more time today, so I don't know if anybody has any questions, or how many of you here have taught a class before? A few of you. Yeah, a few. That's awesome. So, yeah, I don't know. HC, are you still here? Well, yes?
Excuse me, will you begin too busy to do your programming and teaching at the same time?
Can someone help? I couldn't, it was a little too soft. Could you speak louder?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Will you begin too busy to do your open source project and teaching at the same time?
Yes, I do have to choose. So the question was, am I too busy to also contribute to my open source project? I definitely, for the first couple months, it consumed all of my time, and I did not have time to contribute. But after that initial bit, I have learned how to become more efficient in my teaching, and now I'm able to contribute to the open source projects again. But yeah, for the first couple months, it was very difficult. Yes, thank you.
How many new projects for open source have you come up with from teaching? Haven't been inspired by teaching. Have you took on any new ideas to help that are open source to help teaching itself?
So the question was, are there new projects that have been inspired? There have been really small ones, like teaching projects to help the students learn how to do things. Like a lot of the students want to learn how to work with APIs. And so I wrote a small program that works with the Twitter API and then scrapes RSS feeds from people's websites and stuff like that. So there have been probably like 5 or 6 projects like that. As far as like new projects, though, it's more been about people projects. Like we created this thing called Speak Up, and that's just getting together a bunch of people who can mentor brand new speakers. And that's probably been the biggest new project. And then for PyLadies itself, we've established quite a few repos for creating new websites that all of the women who are involved in PyLadies contribute to. So overall, there's probably been maybe like 30 new Git repos. So it's some. And then there was a question way in the back. Yes?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the talk. It's very inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, my question is, it's apparent that you probably try hard to recruit people to become teacher, right, from your talk. And what's the biggest obstacle you faced? Curious, I mean, potential good hackers becoming teachers. What's the biggest challenge that you've, from people?
I think the biggest challenge to becoming a teacher is that it is very hard. Teaching is really difficult. And when people first try to teach, they get very discouraged. Sort of like that horrible graph, they get into the pit of despair of teaching. Because the first time that you go out and you put yourself out there and you try to help someone, sometimes it doesn't work. And so I think what's very important, the same thing for students as for teachers, I think teachers need to find other people who are also teaching. I am very lucky, my husband is a teacher, and so when I've been struggling with teaching, I've been able to ask him for help, and he guides me through some of the worst parts of like indecision and feeling like I'm a bad teacher. And since then, I've also gotten more people involved. I started a mailing list called pedagogy@openhatch.org, and through there I've been connected with a lot of other teachers who are also trying to teach programming. Like if you haven't heard of this thing, it's called software carpentry, and it's been around for about 12 years. And the person who is running software carpentry is teaching scientists how to program for the first time. Because there's, in the sciences, there are a lot of people who don't know how to program. So he goes around teaching these workshops, and he's recruited a lot of other teachers. And since then, I've had a much larger community of teachers to work with.
Thank you.
Yes?
A school for teachers as well, right?
Sorry, say that
We
again?
need a school for teachers as well.
Yes, we do. We need a school for teachers.
Yeah,
and actually, if any of you are interested, in May, we're starting an online teacher training. So if you are interested in learning with us, you are welcome to join. It's going to just be like meetings over Skype and a mailing list. And what we're going to do is just all talk about what it's like to teach and read through research about teaching. Other questions? There was somebody that had their hand up. Yes? I think you have to press the button. Yeah, the red light came on.
My question is, I used to try to teach my wife programming, but we always have a fight. Do you have any good recommendation about this?
Teaching your wife. It can be very challenging. So I have been teaching my husband how to program, and he has no background in it. And initially, he was very frustrated with me because I would go too fast. I would not explain things in terms that he understood. So the way that I got over that was I bought a book. I was teaching him Python, and I bought a book that was specifically computer science and Python. It's by this guy named Zell, Z-E-L-L-E. And I can share, if you come and talk to me afterward, I can share this book with you. But what was really great about this book is that it, in each chapter, started out with learning objectives, and then it made it much more clear, like what my husband was going to learn each time we sat down to go through things. And that helped so much in easing the frustration, because he knew that the lesson had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's really crucial for people when they're first starting out, because they get sometimes so overwhelmed that you need to very carefully lay out the instruction. So I highly recommend that book, actually. Another thing that I've done with my husband is Raspberry Pi. Have you seen these? Maybe you've seen Raspberry Pis? Yes, yeah. He's really into birds. He really likes to watch birds and, find them and stuff like that. And so we created a camera using the Raspberry Pi that takes pictures of birds in our backyard. And so coming up with a project that your wife or your husband or your significant other, someone that you're trying to teach, coming up with a project that they very much want to see happen is super motivating. And they'll be much more patient with you as the teacher when you're trying to help them if you can find a project that they really want. Yes, anyone else? Yes, back there.
I have a question, because when I was teaching my mother, I found some inner. I just told my mother how to operate Windows. I found some inner knowledge that she doesn't know, but yes. I know already, and that inner knowledge is not written in book, written in the internet. So I have a question for you: that when you teach others, do you have noticed some inner knowledge that you already knew, but the others cannot know?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hidden knowledge. There's so much. It's very difficult to write it all down or to find that in a book. The way that I have gotten through that with people when I find all of these pockets of hidden knowledge is by talking with my other teacher friends who are trying to do the same thing. Some of the resources that PyLadies has put together is based on exactly what you're talking about, where you try to teach someone who has never ever thought about programming before for the very first time and what that's like. So I highly recommend looking at the PyLadies.org website and looking at the resources that they have. And if you can't find what you need there, you should tell me, because we're just starting to organize this. And so there are things that are available but not totally linked together. So definitely contact me and I will share with you what I have for that, for getting through that and talking about that knowledge.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else? Yes?
Thank you. I have a question about how to teach senior programming. When I was working, a lot of my co-workers, but they are senior, they only know how to program in older style programming language. For example, COBOL. Oh. They don't know how to program in. They don't know how to what is OOP. They don't know what is version control. So they have a lot of old style and experience. I have to change their model to a new mental style. But I don't know how to do this. Do you have any experience about a suggestion about this?
I wish I had an easy answer. That is a very difficult problem because it's not just that they lack the knowledge, but there's also culture, you know, like what they are accustomed to, what they think is right. In my experience, the best way to get people to do something new is to give them something that they really want very badly. And it takes some time to kind of figure that out, you know, just explore what it is about their programming. Like, is there anything that they don't like about the way that they program today? Have they ever lost a week's worth of code because of a mistake where they erased code and they didn't have a backup? You know, is there a situation where a distributed revision control system would help them work without being connected to the internet? You know, is that a need that they have? You have to really, it's sort of like the same problem that we have with any software project, right? You have to interrogate the user and try to figure out what it is that they really need because they don't always tell you what it is that they actually need. So when I'm trying to change people to use something new, try to introduce them to a new concept, that's what I do. I try to talk with them and figure out, you know, what it is that they really, really need, and is there something, you know, is there a match there? Is there something specific that I can offer them that will solve a problem for them? But often it's very difficult to find that, and so then if that doesn't work, I just try to show that I'm having a lot more fun doing the work that I'm doing with the tools that I'm using than they're having. So those are the only two solutions that I've really found for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
好，那我们接下来就是都是3轨的议程了，那大家就可以往目的地移动。